All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to SQL and Python for Analytics. Thank you all for being here today. I'm really excited to kick off this series. If you did register in advance, make sure that you checked your name off on the computer outside. If you didn't do that when you came in, if you could just do it on your way out, please. And if you didn't get a chance to register before, if you could just send me an email at this address and just say SQL Python class, just so I know who else here. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about what to expect in this workshop. Okay, let's see. Raise your hand if anyone was here for the Excel workshop earlier this semester. Couple people. Okay, great. Welcome back. Nice to see you all again. For those of you who were not at the Excel workshop, this is going to be a pretty interactive format. So I'm going to be teaching you some concepts. We're going to be talking about some ideas, but really you can think of this as more as a lab. You're going to have your hands on the keyboard. You're going to be writing some SQL, writing some Python in these sessions. So hopefully it'll be pretty fun, pretty like interactive. We're gonna stay pretty practical and not too much on theory. So I think it should be a good time. We're going to use a tool called Hex to write our SQL and Python. It's a pretty cool web-based tool that just allows us to kind of avoid any complicated like computer setup stuff and just have a nice browser thing where you can practice writing your SQL and Python code. And Hex is really awesome and gave us their like professional plan for free when I reached out to them about this class. So you should have access to all the like cool features, which is pretty fun. So everyone should go to this link. It's the same one that's right here. You should go there and log in with your USC email, and that should let you into the kind of workspace we're going to be using both today as well as in the future sessions. So please do that at some point in the next few minutes because we'll be kind of getting our hands in there pretty soon. If anyone gets any errors or whatever, let me know. If you can't get in through that link, send me your email to my email address and I can add you manually. Okay, I think that's all the housekeeping. While folks are maybe going to that link and getting logged in, I will just tell you a little bit about me and why I'm here teaching you SQL and Python. I've been working in the data space for the last 10 years or so in a variety of roles in the nonprofit world and consulting briefly here at USC Annenberg. And then now I work at a podcast advertising startup. And in all those roles, I've used data in a bunch of different capacities. In my current role, I write SQL pretty much every day, I would say, Python a little bit here and there. So yeah, it's just a skill I found to be super useful in a bunch of different ways in my career. And this is one of those things where knowing just a little bit puts you way ahead of somebody who doesn't know any. So my goal, my hope for these workshops is that even if you've never played with this stuff before, or maybe you've dabbled in it a little bit, you'll come out of this with enough to kind of know your way around and kind of get your feet wet if that's something that you're looking to do in internships or jobs or projects, anything like that. Cool. All right. With that, let's get into it. Yeah, so make sure you're at that link. Did anyone have any issues with the link? Link is good so far. Okay. Yeah, if you have any issues, just shoot me an email to this email and I will get you in there. Okay. Boom. All right. So this is a 5-week long workshop. It's not, these are just like free non-credit, come whatever. So certainly not required to come to all of them. But if you're new to this stuff, I would recommend that you come to everything. If there's any that you can't make, the recordings and slides and stuff will get posted to the Annenberg Digital Lounge website so you can catch up. But encourage you to make it if you want to come to the whole series. So our first 2 sessions of this 5-week series are going to focus on SQL. Our next 2 sessions are going to focus on Python. And then our last week will be kind of putting it all together because the Hex is a tool that allows us to use both interchangeably. So yeah, today will be kind of SQL part 1. In 2 weeks, we'll be doing SQL part 2. We'll get into Python for 2 more weeks, and then we'll kind of bring it all together, talk about some data visualization stuff. Cool. All right. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about what SQL is so that we kind of have a place to start. So SQL, or people sometimes call it SQL, that's also fine. It's basically just a tool for interacting with a database. And if you're not super familiar with databases, you can think of a database in your mind as basically a giant Excel spreadsheet. Okay, it has columns, it has rows, and we're going to interact with that information via SQL. If you know spreadsheets, it's pretty like a lot of the functions and sort of things we'll be doing. You can make an easy kind of analogy in your mind to how you might do it in a spreadsheet. Things like adding a column, or adding a row, maybe taking the sum of some things. Those are all types of things that we can do in both tools. I mean, databases are used in literally every company now that it is 2024. It'd be hard for me to think of a company or an industry that's not using these. A few that might be of interest to you all, certainly any kind of social media data you're going to be looking at, any company or tool that has an app or a website is going to be running on some sort of database. Any retailer, I mean, any journalistic sources. There's so many places, but really you can think about just about anybody has a database in some form. SQL is the most common kind of tool to interact with databases that is sort of like one step beyond a spreadsheet. So anybody who's like sort of graduated one step beyond spreadsheets, SQL is kind of the next thing. Last thing I'll say about SQL is that it is technically a programming language. I would say it's a little bit sort of in between like an Excel formula and a like intense programming language. So if you've never done much kind of coding before, or never tried kind of programming type of stuff, this is the best place to start. This is the easiest one to start with. Any of my friends who want to like learn to code or whatever, I always recommend starting with SQL because it's going to teach you a lot of the logic that you need while being relatively straightforward compared to a lot of the other tools. All right. SQL is also interesting in that because it's a lot easier to learn than many of the other programming languages, certainly folks in technical roles are going to use SQL. So if you get an internship as a data analyst or something in marketing or something like that, you would certainly likely be using SQL, especially if the company is a little bit more sort of tech oriented. But even if you're in a non-technical role, a lot of companies kind of a common setup is whatever sort of part of the company you're in, you have access to the company database. And if you have more skills to get information out of there, it's kind of to your benefit to be able to use that information. You don't have to wait on somebody else to get it for you. It's pretty common that if you have some skill at SQL and your company has a database, you can get the information you want right away, which I think is a pretty great skill. And it's also a good way to kind of differentiate yourself maybe from somebody else in kind of a similar role or with a similar like educational background. So yeah, hopefully you all will find this useful. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what are SQL queries used for. When we talk about using SQL, what are the types of things that we're trying to do? In the kind of broadest sense, what SQL is going to help you do is find data that meets some criteria. And thank you so much. And the criteria could be all sorts of things, any sort of question you might be asking. The data set that we're going to be sort of using as our sandbox for the purposes of this class today is a data set about TV, a television show called Seinfeld, if any of you have seen that show. So you could imagine some sort of questions that you might be asking as someone who maybe works at a network or a studio or somewhere in the media space. What are some questions that you might have about your data set? So things like what words are in the titles, how many minutes long is something, how many lines of dialogue, which characters say how many different lines. All of these types of questions are things that we can answer with SQL. Another big piece where we think about using SQL and some of the other tools is summarizing information. So things like what was the average episode rating in this season, or what was the highest episode rating overall, right? Those types of questions. So taking a large data set, which maybe has a row for every single episode of a show and boiling it down to some sort of summary by season or by date, some sort of overall summary. Those are types of questions that we can answer. We can also manipulate data. So this comes up a lot in any sort of kind of reporting or categorizing that you might be doing, right? So things like, do we want our data set to say, if something is above a certain threshold, we'll consider that like good, and otherwise it's bad. So things like, do we want to sort of group our ratings together? If our episodes are rated on a scale of 1 to 10, and we want to kind of group them into like good ratings and bad ratings. That's something we can do with SQL rather than having to like go through each row of your sheet and sort of type in a new value. Right? These are the types of things we can do. Within all of that, we can group our data together. We can order our data. So, anything from alphabetizing to sorting by number, any of that, which you might have done in Excel before. And one of the most powerful things, which we'll get into probably at the end of today and into the next session, is combining data from multiple sources. And this is super powerful for being able to kind of bring multiple data sets together, tell a different story, do some kind of really interesting analysis. A lot of that stuff happens when you bring multiple data sets together. SQL has some pretty powerful tools for doing that. So we'll definitely get into that piece quite a bit. Okay, hopefully this gives you some idea of the sort of things we can do with SQL. If you are familiar with spreadsheets, pretty much anything you can do in a spreadsheet, you can do in SQL with a little bit more kind of flexibility and kind of firepower behind it. All right, so what we are going to jump into shortly is our tool Hex. So just to kind of explain a little bit about what Hex is, you can think of it as a notebook tool. It's basically going to allow us to write a chunk of SQL and see the results, and then we could write another chunk of SQL, or we could write some Python, and we can refer back to the results we got before, or refer back to our data set. So it's basically just going to create kind of like a notebook like you would have for any sort of maybe a class where you're learning math or something, where you might jot down something in your notebook. This is going to be our notebook format, but for SQL. So in the final kind of session of this class, what we'll do is put everything together that we've learned and be able to do some Python, do some SQL, do some Python again, create a visualization all within the same tool. So that's kind of what we'll build up to over these 5 weeks, but today we're just going to be focusing on. All right, so first thing we're going to do is just get into Hex and write some initial queries. All right, so when you're in Hex, you should see something that looks like this, some sort of screen with projects or collections, and you should be looking for this, Fall 2024, Week 1. This is going to be our little template for today. What you should do when you find this guy is to do the little ... menu and do duplicate to make your own copy. That'll let you edit and type in your own stuff and play with it a little bit. So make sure you find the Fall 2024 Week 1, Intro to SQL, and make sure you duplicate your own copy. You can give it, give it a name with your name or something like that. Issues? Yeah.
That I'm not authorized to do the duplication.
Okay, all right. Let's see if I can do something about that. Okay, I think we can have it shared with everybody. Everybody is a member. Okay. Okay. All right, just tried a little tweak on there. So if you want to maybe like refresh and try that again, you should get, if you get to it in like the sort of list view or this, you're looking for Fall 2024 Week 1, and you should do ... duplicate. I should have had somebody test this earlier.
You just need to log in with your USC email.
Yeah, it should be your USC email, yes. Okay, because somebody who's getting the error, can I see what it is? Okay, give me a second, we'll figure this out. It's not working for anyone, correct? No one has gotten it to work.
I got it.
You got it to work. Okay, interesting. Tell me. Yeah, great. What is different about yours? I don't know. Did you take the class last year at all?
No.
No? Okay. And everyone's definitely logged in with their USC.
Yes.
Okay. Interesting. Okay, I'm seeing a couple people in here. Okay, let me. All right, let's give this a second. All right. Let's try that. If you were getting the error, try a refresh and then try one more time. Let's see if that'll do the trick. Should be able to see if your duplicate thing comes up. Okay.
Like just refresh your whole window.
Okay, let's try one more thing. Should I do this thing with everybody? Let's see, perfect number. Everybody can see it though, right? Like you can see the thing that says week 1, you just can't. Okay, great. Okay. Okay. All right. Let's try this one more time. Should be editor. Okay, somebody was having this issue. Let's look one more time. What's happening? Okay, did anybody else get it to work besides you? No, you did. What the heck? Okay. Did anyone try fully signing out and back in? If you were getting the error, you tried that, didn't help. Someone else was getting it, could I look at your, it was happening to you as well?
It doesn't work.
All right. Can you try clicking on it, like opening it up, and then let's see if. Okay. Hate stuff like this. Let's do this. Let's try someone who's having the error. What's your email address? And I'll just try sharing it with you directly. Someone want to tell me their email?
It's the first one, Joanna.
This is you? All right, so I want you to be able to view, I think, or edit. Let's try that. Okay.
You still can.
Up the video. What's that mean? Links. Let's see editor. Okay. Tell me your email one more time.
Email GUO JING
JN
ING
ING at USC.
JING. There's no H.
Oh, sorry.
NH at USC.
All right, let's try this. Already in there? Cool, cool. Try this. Okay, you were in here as a viewer. Ooh, some of you are in here as viewers. Okay, maybe that's the problem. Okay. I just changed it to editor. You want to refresh and try one more time?
It's also still a viewer.
Oh, I
And
can-
Luke Wanzhou and the
Mine's working.
last minutes.
If you can, okay, all right, great. All right, I'm gonna go through and change everybody to an editor. Let's try that. Editor. Okay, the trick is though, you got to make sure you make a copy of the thing. Don't just like get in there and edit. Make sure you do a duplicate. Okay. All right. Sorry about this. Thank you for your patience. All right. All right, I think I went through, is it working? Working, working, seeing some head nods? Okay, thank you so much. I think I saw a couple people, viewers, edit. Is there anybody else in here as a viewer? Okay, anybody still having issues? Everybody get it to work? Sweet, okay, thank you so much. Sorry about that. Okay, cool. All right, everybody is in there, and in fall 2024, week 1, you should have made a copy of it. All right, so you should have a from your menu here, when you hover over, you should be able to do a ... and do a duplicate. Okay, so make sure you duplicate, because otherwise we'll be editing the class one and it'll be confusing. Okay, fantastic. So let me give you a little orientation to how Hex works now that everybody is in there. Okay, so once you're in your project, you'll see kind of an editor mode like this. If you were in that kind of main display screen, you should see an edit button at the top, and you can go into that. Yours should say something like copy of fall 2024. You can put your own name if you want, whatever. So this is how Hex works. So it's going to be sort of a series of boxes here. These are called cells, and each cell can contain some different things. So cells can contain text or markdown, which is basically like a type of text. Okay, this is me putting a silly GIF in there because you can do hyperlinks and stuff like that, just as a purpose of demonstration. This is a tiny bit of Python. We're not going to talk about how that works this week. That's just something we're going to use to load our data. But so any cell that says code, that's going to be a cell that is running Python. Then I'm going to have some sort of cells in here with little descriptions, little prompts. Those are going to say markdown or text. And then there's going to be some cells in here that say SQL. All right. And that's where you're going to come in and write your SQL queries. I've got a few sort of in here for you. And you can also add a cell anywhere in this document. You just hover in between the cells. You'll see a little plus sign when you're in this edit view. You can hit add cell. And today we're just going to be adding these ones that say SQL. Okay. So you can think of this as like basically like a giant Google Doc for your learning SQL, but you're going to be in your own copy. So we're not going to be doing any sort of co-editing. All right. So that's the most important thing. Over on the left side, there's some other menus. We're not going to be using a ton of these, especially today, but we will be using one of them. So the very first thing that you're going to do when you're in your copy of this document, you're in this editor mode, you should see a button that says run all at the top. If you don't see a button that says run all, give me a wave. Okay, I'll come over there in a second.
I thought you said.
Okay, yes, thumbs up. Okay, cool. I'll take it. Make sure you hit run all. And what that's going to do is that's going to run this tiny little bit of Python that we have right here, which is going to populate our 2 data sets that we're going to be working with today. I'm not going to talk about how this code works. We will talk about this in 2 weeks. Or 2 sessions, which is more than, you know what I mean. Okay, so this is what's going to load our 2 pieces of data. You'll see underneath our cell right here, we have these 2 little names that pop up in green. These are the 2 names of our data sets. So you could essentially think of these as the 2 spreadsheets that we're going to be working with today. And you can go see them on the left-hand side. If you do this thing that looks like a little stack of Oreo cookies and a lightning bolt, that thing is going to be your data browser. And specifically, if you look at your data frames, that's going to show you our ratings data and our transcripts data, which are the 2 chunks of data that we're going to be looking at. If you click on either of those, you will also see the columns, how many columns and what they are. So our ratings data has 6 columns. It has the columns of season, title, air date, rating, vote count, and description. All right, so what this is basically going to be is a row for each episode of the show with these pieces of information about each episode. All right, so you get to this view on your left-hand side, should be the third icon down. It's the weird cookies and lightning bolt one. And then you'll see data frames in the top. So in your sources, we're just going to be sticking with our data frames right here.
There's no data frame.
If you haven't hit run all yet, you're not going to see any data frames. So make sure you hit run all at the top. This pink button here, your data frames won't show up until you hit run. Once you do that, you should see them show up in that section. Cool. All right, and then we can look at our transcripts data. So down here, we can see this weird unnamed thing. We'll have to come look at that in a second. Character, dialogue, episode number, SEID, and season. Okay, so we're getting a sense that this is maybe, this is data about the transcripts of the show. It's got a row, in each row it's telling us it's got the character and the dialogue. So this is probably a sheet where each row is a line of dialogue from the show. And you'll notice we also have how many rows of data. So 172 rows in our ratings data set. That makes sense. A long running show would have 172 episodes, makes sense. This one has many more rows, right? This one has 54,000 rows. So that probably makes sense as a line for dialogue. Okay, so these are just some kind of like ways you can start to get a feel for what data you're working with. All right. Okay, so first thing that we're going to do is start writing some very basic queries. So this is like sort of an outline of what a SQL query looks like. Pretty much all queries are going to have these first two parts. It's going to select something from something. Okay, select blank from blank. That's sort of our simplest SQL query. And the words are written out just like this. These words just conventionally are written in all caps. You actually don't have to write them in all caps. I usually don't, but you'll typically see them written that way just by convention. But essentially you can think of this as selecting columns or some sort of function of a column from a table. All right, so a table is our spreadsheet, our database. It's our ratings data and our transcripts data that we were just looking at. That's an example of a table. So we could go select some piece of information from that table. If you select star, that will just grab all the information in the table. So select star from table is just a quick way to see an entire table. Then all of these other things we'll talk about later today and in our next session as well. These are things that some queries may have. So some queries may join to another table. Some may do some filtering. It might say select something from something where a certain condition applies, right? Where season equals 2, for example, would only give you data from the second season, stuff like that. We can also group if we're summarizing, if we wanted to summarize by character or by season, for example. We can order our data, so sort it either direction. And we can also set a limit, which is just going to say we only want the first 5 results or 10 results or first 100 results. Okay, so we're going to talk about all of this sort of slowly as we go. The first thing to know is that we're going to be doing some basic queries, which are going to select some information from a table. Okay. All right. So we're going to write our very first SQL query. Okay, and all we're just going to do is get the first 10 rows of one of our data sets. Okay, I'm going to switch over to our project. I have a little demo here. Okay, so what you're going to do, I think I already have a SQL cell in here for you. It should be right here under task number 1. Okay, and what you should do in your SQL cell is write this query. So you're going to go in your cell and you're going to do something like this. Select star from, and then you're going to give, because star is going to give us everything, and then you're going to give us one of our table names. You can use ratings data or transcript data. And then you're going to say limit space 10. The number after the limit is just going to say how many rows we're going to get. All right. So select star from either of our tables, limit 10. The other thing you want to double check in the upper right hand of your little cell, it should say data frames right here. If it does not say data frames, if it says SQL or Snowflake or Hex or something else, you can click on this and change it to data frames. You'll see it because it'll have the same little green highlight things there. Okay. So you should type in something like this. make sure it says data frames right here. And then you can hit this little play icon, which will run it, or you can do Command Enter on your computer. So I'll do Command Enter. It'll load for a second. And it will give me my result, which are my 10 of data. Okay. Anybody not seeing 10 rows of data in there? Okay, great. I can change my limit, right? I could say I want to see my 20 rows of data, and I see it extends my little table here. So I'm looking at my results, which is cool. And I can also just start to kind of browse my data, right? Season number, that makes sense. Episode title, those look like episode titles. Got my air date. Okay, these are from the 90s, that makes sense. Rating, how many votes, this is how many votes the rating was calculated out of. And then it's got a whole text description of the episode. Okay, so it's got like a longer text field. Yeah, question.
I kind of typed the exact same sentence, but they said like your query couldn't be executed.
Okay, great. Let's come take a look. Data frames. So you want star, not plus sign. In might have plus sign there.
Oh,
Should be select star.
oh.
Yeah, you're
Thank
gonna
you.
try that.
It's just a little bit dark.
No, you're
like,
totally
hard
good.
to-
Maybe let's see. Okay,
Okay.
sure. Select star from training data. All right. It looks like let's come once you hit run all and make sure everything's running. There you go. All right, cool. All good. If you're having any issues, first thing you should try is hit the run all button at the top. Make sure everything just reruns. If that doesn't work, make sure this says data frames right here. And if it doesn't, you should change it. Anyone else having issues?
How do you do the star icon?
Star should be shift and then 8. 8. Yeah. Shift 8. It's the like asterisk. Let's have a different keyboard.
Yeah, Windows.
Okay,
I
got
can
it.
just press this one.
Oh, perfect. That'll do it. Yep.
Okay.
Awesome. Okay. If you've got that working, try switching out your table names and looking at your other data set. Okay, so if you were able to see the first 10 rows of your ratings data, go ahead and look at your transcripts data. So all I'm going to do there is just change this. And as I start typing transcripts, it's actually going to suggest it to me, right? So I can just hit tab and it'll take that suggestion. And then you're going to need to run. So I'm going to hit Command Enter on my keyboard, or you can hit the little triangle guy right here and that'll run it. Okay. All right. So just to look at this data set, looks a little different. This is this first unnamed column that looks like it's just a row number column. Then we've got a character. Okay, so Jerry, George, some other people. Then we've got dialogue. It looks like this is the actual line of dialogue itself. Okay. Then we've got an episode number, a season number, and this SEID, which looks like it's just a combination of the season and episode number. Okay, so typically when you're doing anything with SQL, you're going to do some quick queries like this right at the beginning. Just eyeball your data set, make sure you know what you're looking at. Cool. All right, once you have a SQL query written, either, each time you can add a new cell and just start from scratch. You can also copy a cell. So our friend, the duplicate button, which should be working for everyone now, also works on individual cells. So if I have this query that I wrote and I want to make a copy of it, I can do that. My little dot, dot, dot menu, duplicate, and I can see I have my other query right above. I'm gonna go back up to this, up here. Look at 2 places at once. Okay, so I've got my other query I wrote and it's just gonna make a copy for me right here. And then I can make some edits. Maybe I go back to my ratings data and I can run this guy. And then I can see the results of my other queries. You can always go back and see the previous queries that you wrote and what the results were. Okay, so I would recommend for the purposes of this class, every time you write a new query, just do a new SQL cell. So either copy the one you just wrote, or you can do your just add a SQL cell button, which is just you get from the hovering in between any cells. All right, so just make a new cell every time. So you just have kind of a running list of everything that you've written in the class. All right, Any other issues, errors with getting these to run? Feeling good so far? All right, congratulations, you just wrote your first SQL query. Pretty cool. We're only 36 minutes into this thing. Okay, all right. We talked about this. All right, the other type of query that you'll typically write right when you get a data set is to see how big your data set is. How many rows does it have? Now, we're using this nifty tool, Hex, so we already have our little data browser we already looked at, right, which says our one data set is 172 rows, our other data set is a lot more rows, but we can also write a simple SQL query to check that size. And this is good because we know what our results should be. All right, so to do that, we're going to use a very simple function. It's going to be the very similar query to what we just wrote, but we're going to use a simple function called count because we just want to know the number. All right, so I'm going to add another SQL cell right here. And I'm going to do very similar. I'm going to start with select. You're going to type the word select a lot in this class because it's going to be the beginning of every single query. Okay, select. Before I type my star, I'm going to do a function. My function is just count. Those of you who used Excel, you know that count is a function in Excel as well. Count, open parentheses, star. I meant to make this a little bigger. Sorry, let's increase the size on there. Okay. Up. Okay, hopefully that's a little easier to see. Okay, count, and then from our table name again. Okay, so if I'm going to look at our ratings data table first. I'll know I spelled it right if it highlights in green. And then same thing I'm going to run. So I'm going to do Command Enter on my keyboard. And it'll give me a really simple result. So my result, instead of being a bunch of rows, is just one row with my count, and it says 172. If I go check that against my little data browser, I'll see that my ratings data is 172 rows. All right, so count is just an example of a very simple function that's going to apply to whatever is in my parentheses. And in this case, the parentheses is star, which is all data. So count all data. How many you got? 172. Yeah.
Is it possible to count the columns?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm sure it is. And I don't know off the top of my head how to do that.
Oh, I mean, is it like all suggesting like for rows only?
Yes, yeah. So when it's thinking of count, it's thinking of, you can think of each row in the database as an item. It's a good question. So typically your data set is going to be organized where the columns are going to be sort of details about your piece of information. And then each row is going to be sort of the noun, if you will, sort of like the main thing. So in this case, where our row is going to be an episode, every column is just going to be additional information about that episode. Most of the time, databases are going to be organized that way, as opposed to, you would never organize a data set as having sort of a column for each episode. That's just that you could set up a spreadsheet that way, which you might want to do for some reason. But for a database, it's always going to be sort of your individual sort of records or things. Like a row is sort of a like collection of information about one thing. Yeah. So it's a good question. So you probably wouldn't really need to count the columns, I guess, to answer your original question. Okay.
What's the shortcut for the run all?
Yes, it should be Command Enter on your Command Return on your keyboard. If that doesn't work on Windows, you could also try Control Enter. It might work. Okay. All right. Cool. Okay. Okay, so we wrote a couple of very simple SQL queries. You could write these queries on any table, any database you're in. You could walk in and write select star from, look at some rows, select count star, and see how many rows. That's like a classic. If you walked into a data set and did that as the very first thing, somebody would say, okay, like, you know your way around. You know kind of what you're looking for. Okay. All right. Okay, so just to show you a little bit about how to navigate around Hex a little bit more, once you have a few queries like we do in here, you can do a couple of things to just kind of keep yourself organized. All right, so one thing that you can do, so you'll see at the top of our little template, you have this notebook view, which is mainly where we're going to be working. You also have this app builder view. Okay, and what App Builder View is going to do is just going to give you sort of like a cleaner final report version of whatever cells you want from your notebook. Okay, so what I've done in our little template is I've set up my little sort of text prompts that I typed for you all. Those show up in here, which you can choose Go back to your notebook. Every sort of thing in your notebook has a little option on the right-hand side, this little thing that looks kind of like a quilt. It'll say add to app builder or remove from app builder. So I could say, all right, I want to remove my little text about task number 1. I can remove that. I can come over here and we see it skips right to task number 2. So this is just a little tool you can use to kind of keep yourself organized if you want to kind of keep your like final stuff over in your little app that it creates. This is a tool I use at work all the time because I'll write a bunch of SQL to sort of figure out a problem or get an answer for somebody. And then I'll make a little app view that just shows like the final results, right? So they don't have to see like wade through all of my intermediate steps. They can just see this. So for example, if you just wrote your query here, I'll do it again, select star from ratings, data, limit 10. I've got this data here and I wanted to add this little table over to my app. I could do that. I could just hit this little icon, come over to my app, and now I see after my task, I've got my little data table that I made, which is kind of cool. We'll use this more later in the class, but feel free to play with it as we go. All right. And then once you're in here, this is just a little table, so you can kind of interact with this here as is. You can like download these results if you want. Probably won't be using much of that stuff, but you can. It's intended to be a little bit interactive, sort of at each point. The last thing I'll say is each time you run a query, it's going to give your query sort of the results of your query its own name and treat it as its own data set. Okay, so you'll see I just ran this little query, select star from ratings data, limit 10. Over in my data browser here, I have my 2 tables that I started with, but I also have a 3rd table now, which is just called data frame, that has 10 rows. So this table here, if I click on it in my data browser, it has all these same columns and it just has 10 rows. It's this data set. So it's any result of a SQL query that you write could then be used as the source for another query. So I could come down here and say, I'm going to do another query and I want to select, I'll do count star from data frame. Okay, so I'm going to just select everything from these results and I can do that. So any result that you create becomes its own query or becomes its own table that you can query. Okay, so we'll start to use that later in the class. That's pretty powerful, especially as you're learning, because you can write a query that does sort of one part of what you want to do, look at it, make sure it looks right, make sure it's working, and then your next query can just refer back to that and kind of do the next step. So it's a good way to break it down. It's a good tool as you're learning. All right, is everyone feeling okay getting around text? Everyone's been able to add cells, write queries, feeling okay? No more errors. Okay, sweet. All right. Okay, so the thing that I really like about SQL is that I find it pretty intuitive as far as thinking of the question that I want to answer just from talking to somebody to how do I actually get that answer in SQL, okay? If you think of that list of keywords that we started, it's like a little bit of like robot language, but it does make logical sense as to what each kind of word is doing. So try to draw those lines as we go through this next part. So for example, what characters in the show Seinfeld speak the most often? All right, we would kind of start looking at that information. We're going to select the characters from the transcripts, right? That like kind of makes logical sense. It's like a weird sort of robotic way to say this, but it's like you can sort of see easily how we got from this question to this query, right? So that's kind of how we'll start to construct queries. You want to write kind of like the simplest part you can think of, what would I select and what would I select from? And then we'll start to add some additional components on. So let's go take a look at this example. I'm going to do a down, I'm going to do a new cell and I'm going to say select character from transcripts data. It's going to do the nice autocomplete for me. And I'm going to run this. Okay, so this is going to give me just my character column. So my transcripts data column had a bunch of other table had a bunch of other columns. This one just has the one column. Now, I was expecting a list of characters. What I want is like a Jerry, George, Elaine, Kramer, right? Like I just want the list of characters. But this one is actually just showing me that full column. So it's got a bunch of repeats, right? I can see it has 55,000 rows. So this isn't super helpful as a list of characters. Okay, it's sort of like the bones of what I need, but it's not quite there. So I want to eliminate the duplicates. I don't want Jerry to be listed 1,000 times. All right, so this is where we can start adding in some other kind of keywords and functions to our queries. So we're going to take the same query that we just wrote and add one word, one sort of modifier function, which is called distinct, which you could basically unique, right? So we're going to say, do this same query, but only give us the unique result, only give us the distinct results. Okay, so I have my very basic query. I ran it. I got data back. I always encourage you to start with this. And then you can come in and edit, and I'm going to say, all right, I'm going to add in the word distinct. Okay, some of our keywords and functions are just going to sort of sit right before what we're selecting with spaces. Some of our functions are sort of more like math-y functions. We'll use parentheses. I'll sort of show you that as we go. No parentheses for this one. I'm just going to do select distinct character from transcripts. And now I can see that my results changed a little bit. Right now it just says Jerry once, says George once, and now it says a bunch of other names. Okay, and my total list of rows, I can see it's given me a little summary down here. This is 1,639 rows. That's a lot fewer than this 55,000. So this tells me that I've gotten sort of a list of unique character names. Now I can see some like data quality problems with this data set, right? This fourth person is named Clay. It's right after this person, Claire. It's probably just a typo in the data set, right? There's probably not also a person named Clay. But, you know, working with large data sets, there can be some data quality issues. So it's a common kind of thing that you'll run into. But it's recognizing this as a unique name because it is spelled differently. Okay. All right. Distinct would work on any of the other attributes that we wanted to see. So for example, if we wanted to select something distinct from our ratings data, we could do select distinct season from our ratings data. And if we do that, it'll give me one row for each season number. Pretty simple, but so you can apply this word distinct to anything that you are selecting. If your table names are not all lowercase, so in this case, these ones are capitalized. If you do the autocomplete, it'll put it in quotes. This should still work if you just do season like this, just because it's not like case sensitive. Okay. All right. Okay, we've written a few queries, running some SQL cells, kind of know what's up. Okay, great. All right. So let's go a little bit deeper into this example. So we have our list of distinct characters, but we don't know who speaks the most often, right? If I go back to my select distinct character from transcripts, data. Okay, I can see these are all my characters, but I don't know who's talking the most. Is it this person, Laura? Is it Elaine? Is it the audience, right? How many times did each of these people speak? I don't know that yet. So I'm going to add that, and I'm going to layer in the function that we've already talked about, which is count. Okay, so what I'm basically going to do here is I'm going to layer in that function we talked about before and add one more concept, which is grouping. Okay, so all I'm going to do next is I have all my list of characters and I want to know how many lines of dialogue does each character have. I know how many lines of dialogue there are total, but I want to sort of take this total and group it by which character said which line, right? So to select additional columns, I'm going to add a comma after this initial thing that I selected. Okay, you don't have to separate by new lines as well. I just like to do that because it's a little easier to read, but you don't have to. And then I'm going to do my count function. Just my count star. All right, so this is going to select this distinct character name, which I already have. And then as a second column, right, the thing after the comma is going to select a count. All right. Now I will try to run this and I will get an error. Okay. I got an error. The most important thing to do when you get an error message is to read the error message because sometimes it does tell you something useful. So in this case, gonna say exception, binder error. I don't know what that is. Column character must appear in the group by clause. Okay. Either add it to the group by list or do some other thing. Okay, so this is useful because it's going to tell us a little bit about what we need to do. Anytime you're applying a function to one column but not another, you're going to need to tell it to group by that column. Otherwise, it's going to not understand. It thinks it's just trying to count all the rows. We've got this distinct thing going on. It kind of needs you to put the pieces together. Okay, so all we're going to add here, we're adding one more thing, which is group space by. Okay, that's going to come after our from section. And we're just going to tell it what to group by. So in this case, I'm going to say group by character. All right, great. Okay, and then I'm going to run that. And now I have that same result I had before, Jerry, George, Claire, Clay. But I have now a count of how many lines of dialogue each person had, which is pretty cool. All right. Now, intuitively, as a human, if I were going to make this list, I would put the people who spoke most at the top. Okay, but I gotta spell that out here. So I can add one more layer to what we just did. So once you've got this grouped, okay, we can do one more layer, which is to put these in order. All right, now you'll notice this column says character because it was already called character. This column has a weird name. It's just called count star because that's the function that it's doing. All right, I kind of want to give it a nicer name. So just to rename it, I'm going to say as. So right after my count star, I'm going to do space as and then give it some other name. I might call it number of lines. The column name just can't have spaces in it. All right, so you can just give it any name that doesn't have spaces. I'm going to do that. Before I make any other changes, I'm just going to run it with that one change. And you'll see all it did here was just change my little column name. Just a little cleaner. You can rename any column, even if it already has a name like character. You can rename that. I guess say I want to call it name or character name, something like that. Okay, so you can rename any column using as. All right, and then the next thing that I wanted to get to was how to put these in order, right? Who talks the most? Who are my main characters? After my group by, I'm going to add one of our other SQL terms, order by. All right, I have these all earlier up in your little template as well. There's a little, right, this is sort of how to create a SQL query. So we're using select, we're using from, we're using group by, and we're using order by. Okay, so we're like kind of picking out the ones that we want to use. All right, so coming back to here, I'll group by character. So I could order by either of my columns. I could order by character. And if I do that, it will order using this column. It will go alphabetically. So it's going to start with all these symbols and then A and then B, right? But these aren't really my main characters. These are like people with one line. So what I really want to do is I want to order by number of lines. Okay, to sort of get who are these people who are talking the most. I'm going to do that. All right. And now I will see that it is ordered by number of lines, but it's starting on the low end, right? It's starting on all the people who have one line. So I'm going to give it one more little keyword. With order by, it's always going to default to an ascending order. Okay, so lowest to highest. If you want it to go highest to lowest, you need to tell it descending, which it understands as DESC. Okay, descending from highest to lowest. I'll add that word and I'll rerun and I will see right at the top, Jerry with 14,000 lines, George, 9,000 lines, Elaine, almost 8,000 lines, right? This is the sort of result that I might expect from this question that I asked, which is how many times each character speaks, okay? Does everybody have something that looks kind of like this?
I got an error message.
Okay, what's your error message say?
Binder error.
Okay.
References column number of lines not found in from clause.
Okay, so it's not finding our number of lines in our from clause, meaning you might not have something that says number of lines up here. So it might be you spelled it slightly differently or
Oh,
that you're
yeah.
missing that part. Yep.
No, it was a spelling error.
Cool. It's all good. Happens a lot to me as well.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Let's see, something else I'll show. Let's see. All right, one thing I'll show quickly here, any of our kind of data tables, once you've got a little table of results, you can do some formatting on these results here. So if you click on any column header, you can come down to format and make any little changes. So we might be working with some other data later where you would want to change it to like a date or a currency, something like that. For me, I'm just going to change these to a number with 1,000 separators. All right, that's just going to add commas. So you can do little formatting things like that, decimal places, etc. All right here, similar to formatting options that you can do in Excel. All right. Okay. Awesome. All right. Okay, so as we go through, just don't forget about your data browser. This is the same thing that we looked at before. It's on the left-hand side of your screen, and this is where you're going to be able to see what all your column names are as we go through and write different queries. As we've already experienced a few times, just a little spelling error can give you an error if it's not selecting what you want. So you can always come and just like copy paste the title name from or the column name from here also, just to make sure that you're spelling it exactly as it is in the table. All right, and then as I already mentioned, right, as you write more queries, each one is going to appear as its own data frame that you can refer back to. It'll just keep giving them numbers and names. You can also rename your data frame. So I can say, I could call this something like lines by character. This is also another example where it can't have spaces. So I typically do the little underscores. I could do that, and then I'll see it shows up in my data browser with a bit of a clearer name. Okay, you certainly don't need to do that for every query you write, but as we go and we start layering them on top of each other, that's something you might want to try. Okay. All right, and just to do a quick demo of how to use these. So I could look at my lines by character. Maybe I want to refer back to those and sort them in a different way, right? So I could do select star from lines by character. So I'm treating this as just my from my table. So let me scoop that a little higher up on the screen. Select star from this, which is just my previous result. And I could say order by number of lines. I could do this and we'll see it's giving me the same data, but it's ordering. I did the just ascending sort here. So it's pulling from this table and sorting a different way. So that's a simple example, but you could do a more complicated step as you go. All right. Okay, so we're going to get into a few more little tasks. All right, so moving down our little template here. So we've got kind of our first 10 rows of our data set. We did have the number of rows in our data set. All right, this is the one we just walked through right here. Which characters in Seinfeld speak the most often? All right, that's this query that we just wrote. These are lines by character. All right. Next thing we want to figure out is which season had our highest average episode rating. Okay, that's the next thing that we're going to figure out. So average is kind of another kind of simple math function that's very similar to count. It's going to work in almost exactly the same way as count. All right, so if we want to know what season has the highest average episode rating, which of our data tables do we want to start pulling data from? Yeah. Ratings data, fantastic. So I'll usually do something like this. I'll write the word select so I don't forget it later. I'll come down and just do from, and I'll put my table name in there. Okay, fantastic. Off to a strong start. What columns do we think I might be interested in for answering this question? My question is, what season has the highest average episode rating? So what columns from my ratings data set am I going to want to select? Season, fantastic, and rating, very good. All right. So normally when I'm writing a query, I'm going to write something super simple like this and just run it, make sure it runs. Okay, fantastic. This doesn't quite answer my question yet. This still has 1 row per episode, but I've got my season, I've got my rating, I've got all those sort of ingredients I need, right? Okay. Now let's go look at this previous query that we wrote where we did a couple of things. All right, so we did our function on as our second column, right? So we added a column here where we did applied a function. In this case, we did count star, so star just being count everything. We can also apply a function to a specific column, which is what we're gonna do here. All right, so instead of just selecting rating, we're gonna apply our average function to rating. So we're gonna say average, open parentheses, rating, close parentheses, like this. Right. Sorry, average, sorry. AVG for average. Okay. Which you should remember because it'll pop up in pink. Gives you a little visual hint if you forget. Okay, and then we're gonna get this error. This error should look very familiar from before. Column season must appear in the group by. So anytime we're doing a function on one of our columns, we gotta tell it what to group by because we're not doing that function on all the columns. So similar to before, after my from, I'm gonna add my group by. I'm gonna group by season. Okay. Added my group by, run that, see how I did. Okay, looking pretty good. So previously I had a bunch of rows. I had 172 rows, and now I can see I'm down to 9 rows. Looks like 1 row per season. Okay, so it's starting to look pretty good. All right, a couple of changes I would make here. Again, my column name is AVG rating. That's not super user friendly, not something I would want to have in the report header to my boss. So I would probably just do a little as on this column and just give it a cleaner name. I'm going to say as average rating. Column name can be anything as long as it doesn't have spaces. So I usually just do a little underscore. Okay, then I have season average rating. Pretty good. All right, and then the last thing I would do as a visual is just clean these up a little bit because they probably don't care about the 9th decimal place of the average rating. So I might come into my little average rating column. This is where I'll use my format option down here. So format as number, and I might fix the number of decimals. All right, so when your format number, you can choose a few settings here. I might say I just want to fix it to have 1 decimal place. All right, which I can do here. And then I'm looking at the same data, but it's just a little easier to read. Okay, everybody have 1 row per season, getting our average. Any errors? Feeling okay. Okay, great. All right, we have one more thing to do, which is our question was, what season has the highest episode rating? Okay, so we have all these this is a small data set, so we could see with our eyeballs which one has the highest. We can also write a query to figure that out. So I'm going to give this data frame a new name. I'm going to call it rating by season. And then I'm going to start another query, right? Just to separate out this step. We could do it in the same one also. I'm going to separate it out. And I'm going to say, I want to select season from rating by season. So from my that's my data set that I just made, sorry. Remember to scroll up so you guys can see. Okay, so this is my data frame for my last result. I'm going to select the season from there. And then I'm going to use 2 tools that we've already talked about. I want to know what has the highest rating. So I want to order by, right? I want to order by rating. So I know which one is the highest. I'm going to order by, double check the name of my column. My column was average rating. Order by average rating. I want them to go descending. Yes, very good. I can do this. And it's just going to do a sort of my seasons. I can go check with my eyeballs up here. It looks like season 8 has the highest rating. So it put this in order. And if I just want to know what the highest rated season number is, I could add one more thing to this query, which is just limit 1. You only care about knowing that 1. I can do that. And then I've got my very simple answer 8. So the question was, what season has the highest average episode rating? And I was able to figure it out with SQL and spit out the answer 8. Pretty cool. All right. Now I could have done this in the same query, right? I could have just added my order by and limit onto this query after my group by. Could have done that all as one, but as you're learning, it can be helpful to do one part and kind of separate out the parts. So up to you, whatever kind of works better for you. You could do this all as one query or as two separate ones. Okay. How are we feeling? Did everybody get season 8? Did anybody get a different season? Sweet. Okay, cool. All right. So we did our highest average episode rating. All right, so next thing we're gonna do is answer another question. What are the names of all of the episodes in our highest rated season? Okay, so we just figured out what our highest rated season was, which is 8. And the next thing we wanna get is a list of the names, the titles of all the episodes in that season. All right, so to do that, we're going to use one of our tools that we haven't used yet in our kind of query toolbox. Back up to my little overview here. So we've used select and from in every single query that we've written. We've used group by, we've used order by, and we've used limit. Okay, so we've played with where you can use some or all of none of those in addition to our select and from. The next thing we're going to add in is our where. Okay, so in where you can think of as basically a filter. So it's going to filter down based on a condition. So anytime you have a where, you're going to have the same or fewer number of rows from what you started with, because we're going to filter down. Okay, so we want to know what are all the episode titles of episodes in our highest rated season. Okay, our episode titles are sitting in our ratings data set. So I'm going to start there. I'm going to select title from ratings data. All right, just as a simple, right, figure out what your table is, figure out what your columns are, make sure that runs, everything's spelled correctly. Okay, looking pretty good. To start, that is still all 172 rows. And I want to cut it down to just the ones from season 8. All right, so what I want to do is add a where after my from. All right, so select title from ratings data where some condition. And in this case, my condition is I want the season to be a specific season. I'm going to tell it the column name. I'm going to say where season equals 8. Right? Give that a try. All right, when I do that, I can see in my little summary that it filtered me down from 172 rows to 22 rows, because that used to be how long a TV season was before the advent of miniseries. All right, and so I see I have all of my episode titles from season 8. Cool. All right. We can do any other kind of operations on our where condition as well. So for example, I could say I want all the episodes where the season is greater than 7, for example. So it doesn't just have to be equals, you can do math operations. If I do that, it looks like it's going to update to 42 rows. That makes sense because it's season 8 and 9, so twice as many rows as last time. All right, so I can do a bunch of stuff with my where. It doesn't have to be just equals. And I can also do text. So I could say I wanted to equal some specific piece of text, put that in quotes, same thing. Okay. All right, so we're going to get into some slightly more complicated functions next, which we'll sort of start today and we'll continue in the next session. But before I do that, I want to just talk briefly about one of the tools that exists in Hex and also in kind of any other tool you're going to be using to write SQL, which is that like everything else, there are now AI sort of assistant tools in Hex and everything else. So the one that's in Hex is called Magic. You're welcome to use it in this class if you like. I'm going to show you what it looks like. It's kind of up to you if you want to use it or how much you want to use it. I'm going to give you some recommendations if you do want to use it of sort of how to think about it. In Hex, you can use it to help you generate SQL and or Python code, and then you can modify that code further yourself. So similarly to using ChatGPT. Much like sort of calculators in math class, right? You still have to know and understand what multiplication and division do, although you don't have to remember every single like little step of exactly how to do long division because you can use your calculator, right? So I think about it in that same way. We're going to work through writing a lot more queries this week and in the next session. They are relatively simple. They're ones that you can probably generate with relatively little issue from an AI assistant, which I'll show. But I would encourage you to make sure that you understand how they work. Try writing a few of them yourself so that you kind of build that muscle memory for it. Okay, just a quick example of that. So the example that we already did, okay, which was essentially which characters speak the most. I just typed that into our little Hex magic assistant cell. All right, and this is what it gave me. Okay, it gave me this weird chart that I can't really read with all the little names down here. Okay, so it gave me like some result, but not super helpful. Okay. I tried again. I said, write a SQL query for what character talks most, because what it sort of defaulted to trying to make a chart for me. Okay, and it gave me this query. Okay, this query is like kind of right, but also like completely wrong. So this is what it gave me. I said, write a SQL query for which character talks the most. That's the same thing I just said to you guys 20 minutes ago, and we wrote that query together. It said select character, count star as line count. Okay, that seems pretty similar to what we wrote. From demos.movie data, no idea what that is. Group by character, okay, that's pretty similar. Order by line count, descending, limit 1. If you're writing like SQL in code and you're going to write a bunch of queries, you do a semicolon afterwards. You don't need to do that in this class because you'll just write them in a different cell. So no need to worry about the semicolon. So it wrote a query that's actually like fairly correct, but it like made up a table name, like that data table doesn't exist. That's not one that we have. So if you have a query like this that's generated for you, you can look at it, understand if it's correct. The only thing that really needs to be fixed in this particular example is the table name. Okay, so I just went in there and edited our table name, made it transcripts data. All right, and I got what I wanted, which is Jerry talked the most. When we wrote this, we didn't actually do the limit one. We just had it in order, right? So we could see it's Jerry and then George and then Elaine and then whoever. So I could have also removed the limit if I wanted. So that's an example of how you can use sort of this tool. But as you can see, right, in order to even make this like pretty simple fix, I kind of need to understand what it spit out to me in the first place to know that this is right. Okay, so again, kind of up to you guys. This tool did not exist 10, 15 years ago when I was learning SQL. So just wanted to put that out there because you'll see it in Hex as we're poking around. Okay. Any questions about that? Okay, so back to SQL. One of the most important and most powerful concepts that SQL can be used for is joining data together. All right, you'll kind of see this I don't know, anything you're reading the news, any sort of like new interesting analysis, scientific articles. A lot of those like interesting discoveries or interesting stories come from combining information from a lot of sources. Okay, so this is where SQL can be really, really powerful. Okay, and the way that you combine data together in SQL is if you have some column or columns that tell you which pieces of information to combine. Right, so you could imagine if we had a data set that had everybody's student ID number and favorite ice cream flavor, and then student ID number and address that you live at, we could join that data together and send everybody their favorite ice cream, right? Because we've got student ID number to know which piece of information goes with which. So those are the types of columns that we want to think about when we think about joining data. Sometimes it's going to be a single column that's unique identifier, like an ID number or an email address, maybe a name in some cases. It can also be multiple columns. So in this case, when we're talking about TV episodes, it's all of one show. So as long as we have our season number and our episode number, we can join our data sets together, right? So we have some data about the dialogue. We have some data about the episodes themselves and their ratings. We could join those data sets together as long as we both know This rating is from season 1, episode 1, and this number of lines in the dialogue is also from season 1, episode 1, right? So we just want to look for these pieces of information that overlap. That's how we join data together. So if we were going to think about joining our data sets together, we would want to look for those columns. So if we go to our data browser, we have in our ratings data, our season, our title, our air date, our rating, our vote count, and our description. We have our season number, but we don't actually have an episode number in this data set. If we go to our transcripts data, though, we do have episode number. We have episode number and season number as 2 columns. We have like almost enough information to join these 2 together, but not quite. So I'm going to sort of use this example to teach you a couple of other slightly more complicated SQL functions that we can use to fill in that information and then let us join together. So first thing that we're going to do is add a column to that data set that's missing episode number. All right, any of our functions in SQL, we've already done this where we've added columns. If I go back to my little demo up here, right, average rating wasn't a column that existed before, and we've simply added it by adding a comma, doing a little function on an existing column, and then giving it a name, right? So we can add any column that we want. So we're going to do that again here to add a column to create our episode number. All right, we're going to use a function called row number as our first function that we're going to use. So let me get to my demo here. Okay, we're going to talk about a few functions, but we're going to talk about row number first. All right, row number is a very simple function. It adds a column and it just spits out the number of that row. Okay, so as you probably saw in our transcripts data set, if we do our select star from transcripts, which is up here somewhere, it already has a column that just has the number of each row. That's like a pretty common data set thing to have. Our ratings data set does not have that, but we're going to use it to add a column, and then we're going to sort of transform that into our episode number. Okay, so stay with me. We're going to do this in a few steps. First thing that we're going to do is just grab all the data from our ratings data set. Let me scoop this up. All right, so to grab all the data, I select what? I select star. Very good. All right, select star from ratings data. Fantastic. Make sure that works. Yep, works. And then I'm going to add my column. All right, so select star, comma. So I've selected all the columns. I'm adding a comma because I'm going to add yet another column. And I'm going to use my function row number. It's row underscore number, open, close parentheses. Nothing needs to go in between because it's not taking any information. It's just always going to return our row number. All right, so I'm going to run that. All right, this is unhappy with me for some reason. Oh, I think this one does have to be all caps. Let's try that. Row number. I was going to try to just show you this function on its own, but I might have to do the whole thing first. There we go. Okay, sorry, I was going to try to do the first one, but it didn't let me do it without it. Okay, so we're going to do 2 functions kind of at the same time. Okay, so what row number is going to do is it's going to add a column with the number of the row. And then we're going to also use another function called partition. Okay, partition is sort of a helper function, and all that's going to do is it's going to take the other function that we give it, it's going to apply it to part of the data set, and then whatever we want to sort of split up or partition by, it'll start over again on the next chunk of data that it finds. Okay, so essentially what we're doing here is we want to use this function to give a number to every row, but we're going to tell it we only want to do that over each season. So we're going to use this partition function, so over partition by season. Okay, this is a slightly more advanced function, so don't be nervous if this feels like a little bit more. We're going to walk through it. Partition by season, and then I'm just going to do my as to give it like a little bit of a cleaner name. This is just gonna generate a number all through season 1, and then when the season number changes, when it changes to 2, it's gonna stop generating row numbers, it's gonna start over again from the beginning, and it's gonna generate row numbers again all through season 2. Gonna get to the next season, season 3, it's gonna stop and it's gonna start again with the row numbers. Okay, so partition is just taking a function that we're giving it. We're gonna group by whatever column, in this case season, and we're just gonna start over again. All right, so I come back to my little demo. Go look at, hide my data. If you want to hide the sidebar, you can just click this little icon, give yourself more space. Okay, so here is my data set. It still has 172 rows, right? I don't have any where clauses. I haven't filtered anything down. I've added my comma. I've added my row number function. I've added my over partition by season. Okay, this piece is all in parentheses. We'll get more into that next week, so don't worry too much about this, but I wanted to show you a more complicated function. I just gave it whatever column title, I just called ep number. Okay, and then I can see my ep number column got generated over here. So let's go take a look at what that looks like. So in this case, it's going all the way down. The season changed from season 5 to season 9. And at that point, if we follow this over, it counted up to 21 and then it started again from 1. Okay, so it's working pretty well, except I would generally want the seasons to be in order. It's a little weird that the seasons went out of order. I'm gonna do this, add an order by after my from, like we've done before. I'm gonna say order by season to make sure those are going in order. All right, and now I can see here's my season 1, episode 1, season 1, episode 2, etc. I can scroll down. And then I can see when it changes to season 2 right here, it started over. So it counted up to 5 and started again from 1. Okay. So function was a little complicated, but essentially all we did is we added a column with this logic so that we now have a season number and an episode number. And the whole reason that we did that is because our other data set, our friend transcript data, also has season and episode number. So once we have season and episode number, we can start to do some interesting things like combine our data sets. Okay? Any questions? Yes.
How does we know like the season in rating data sets? Because you said there is no season data for in the rating data, how do we know which season for each?
There's no episode number. So when I look at, so when I look at the columns that I have in my original rating data set, these are my 6 columns. So I have season, I have title, I have all this, I have date, so I know that they can be ordered. But I don't, and in this case, the original data set had the dates in order, but I also could have done an order by date if that wasn't the case. But yeah, so I'm just looking at here at my column names. Yeah, question, another question, yeah.
Excuse me, could you repeat the function of the over the participating by the season?
Yes. Totally. Okay. So this is using a couple keywords at once. Basically, this is just a little function that's just going to generate our row number starting from 1. It's just going to go 1, 2, 3 all the way down. Okay. Partition is sort of like a partner function. So over is just going to sort of join our partition onto there. Partition just kind of means like split up. So it's basically going to say, do this thing where you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but just do it within each season. So it's the same concept as group by, right? Where we're telling it like, just sort of like operate within this group. Before we were using that idea to sort of take the average or count in a group. Here we're doing it as do this function over this group. So it's a slightly more complicated version of that idea. So we're just saying group by season, and then within each season, do your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you're doing that. So we're going to end up with a bunch of row number 1s because each season is going to have its own episode number 1. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah.
So you said season numbers already in it, like how is it different from just ordering by season number?
Great question. So we have when we have our column with our season number. So in this case, season 1, season 2, et cetera. And then if we look at our transcript data set, do I still have it up here? Yeah, okay, great. So our transcript data set has a column with our season number as well, and it has our column with our episode number. So if, let's say we didn't have this column here, okay? We just had season number in our 2 data sets. Could we join that together? Potentially, if we were grouping everything by season. Okay, so if we've grouped everything by season, that would mean we've used our group by, which would mean we have 1 row for each season in our data set. So our 2 data sets have, let's say, what is it, 9 seasons, 9 rows each. At the season level, yes, we could join on season number, right? So we could do, maybe we could say, let's do season number, count of number of lines, group by season number so that we have sort of summarized down. We could do the same thing on our ratings data. We already did that with our average episode rating. We could join those 2 together. If we want to join at the episode level though, we don't have enough information. Like you have to have 2 matching columns, or you have to have enough matching columns with full information to join your 2 data sets together. So in this case, we have episode and season, our other one only has season. So there's no way to sort of tell SQL to know which episode comes in order. We know that intuitively from just looking at, like, we would just sort them by date, and sort of in our head, we would go like, oh yeah, the earliest date is episode 1. That's sort of like the mental leap that we would make. This is essentially, we have to be a little more explicit and tell SQL that the earliest date is episode 1 so that we can match them on an episode level. Did that help, or did that make it worse?
I can ask maybe.
Okay, all right, maybe we'll come back to it. Maybe it'll help as we go. Any other questions about this before we continue? Okay. All right. So we've added our column with our row number. Okay, so next thing we're gonna do is look at how we can join our data. So maybe this gets a little bit to your question, which is we want to kind of make sure each data set is summarized by episode. So we have some information about each episode in our 2 different data sets, and then we can bring them together. Okay, so in this case, we want to let's look at some lines of dialogue. So I'm going to come into our transcripts data. I'm going to do a simple select from our transcripts data, and I'm going to do a couple of columns. I'm going to do our season, I'm going to do our episode number, and then I'm going to do maybe number of lines to start. Okay. So to do that, I'm going to do select, I'm going to do season, I'm going to do, looks like it's an episode number. All right. I'm going to do a count function. Okay. And I'm going to count our lines of dialogue. All right. As lines of dialogue. Okay. Fantastic. Okay. So season, episode number, lines of dialogue from my transcripts data. I'm going to run this and I'm going to get what error? Anyone? Anyone? Must appear in group by. We've already seen this one a few times, right? Okay. Once I have this error, I know I need to add my group by. I'm going to do that after my from. And I'm going to group in this case by 2 columns because I have 2 columns that don't have a function. In the previous case, I just had the 1. So I need to tell it that it needs to group by both of those pieces of information. I'm going to do that group by season, comma, episode number. I'm going to run that. Okay. And then I'm going to get this little summary. It's going to have season, episode number, lines of dialogue. And I can see in my summary that it spit out 173 rows. That's about the number I was expecting, right? Because I know my ratings data has 172. So there might be some data cleanliness issue where there's 1 extra row in this data set, but it's pretty close. So I could see, okay, I have my other data set that has 1 row per episode. I've made this data set that has 1 row per episode. So I'm getting closer to be able to joining them together. Okay. I'm going to rename this little frame. I'm just going to call it something like lines per episode, just so I can separate these out. Episode. Okay, and then I can look in my data browser at my lines per episode and I can see these are my 3 columns. All right. So. Okay, so what we're gonna do next is join our data together. So this is where we're gonna use this summary that we just did. So let's go look at our ratings data again. So I'm gonna, sorry, I'm gonna scoop this up, select star from ratings data. All right. And I wanted to grab my one that had my episode number. So that was my other data frame. Okay, so our ratings data, right? Our original data set did not have episode number. We added it previously. For me, that was data frame 7. So I'm going to call this ratings data with episode number. Okay, so this is the query that we wrote before with our little row number partition by. Let me scoot this back up. Okay, so this query that I had before, I've just given it a little name so I can come back and find it. Okay. Or it was data frame 7 for me, maybe something different for you. Okay, so I've got that one the way that I want it. And then I've got this one, which I've called lines per episode, also summarized by episode and season. Okay, so I'm going to come into a new SQL cell now and get ready to do my join, all right, which is the new thing we haven't talked about yet. Okay, so to start, I'm going to start with one of those data sets that I wanted. I'm going to do select star from ratings data with episode number, which is the result of that other query that we just wrote. All right, I'm going to look at my results real quick and just double check that it has my handy dandy little F number column on the side. Okay. All right, and then I'm going to do my join. There's a few different kinds of joins that you can do. We'll start with regular join. We'll get into the other types of joins next week. All right, so when you're going to join 2 tables together, you're essentially writing a second SQL query, and you're going to tell it what other table and what other columns you want, and then you're going to tell it which columns to use to overlap. Okay, so in our sort of previous example with the student ID numbers and your address and your ice cream flavor, you would say, give me all the students with addresses, give me all the students with ice cream flavors, and join them on the student ID column, right? You got to tell it which column is going to exist in both to match. So that's what we're going to do here. Okay. I'm going to do this. So to do my join, I'm going to write another little tiny simple SQL statement inside my parentheses. So I'm going to say join, I'm going to open up some parentheses and doing a very simple SQL statement in here. In this case, it's going to be select this from my other little summary that we just did. So this is lines per episode. This is our one that we just did right here, where I have lines of dialogue per episode. All right. Now we can try to run this and it's going to give me an error because it's saying end of input. That means I'm missing something at the end. So I'm going to tell it what columns to match together. Okay. So I'm going to tell it on. I'm going to come up to my columns and check my column names. Okay. So I have season is just named season in this table. I'm going to come up to this one and it's named the same thing. All right. Season. All right. And then the other column I want to give it is episode number. And up here, it's F number. Okay. So it's slightly different. So I just got to take into account those 2 spellings. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to do F number equals episode number. I should make sure I get the spelling exactly right. Okay. Great. Okay. All right. Okay, so all I'm doing here, I've done a select statement, select star from table like we've done before. I said join as my new word that I've added. I did another select star from table, exactly what we talked about before. and then I'm telling it which columns I want it to join on, okay? All right, let's give this a try. All right, it's getting a little cranky. I spelled something. Let's try this. Getting a little cranky. Okay. All right. Okay. This one can get a little. Okay. This is the case where there's sort of two ways to do something, and I think maybe it'd be easier to teach you the other way. So when you're telling it your columns to join, if they have the same name, you can write this a little bit more simply. I did not give them the same name in our example, so I was going to do this, but I think it would just be a little easier to name them the same name. So we already talked about renaming columns. You use as, and then you can give it whatever name you like. So in this case, I had ep number as my little column name before. So I'm just going to give that here so I don't have to be like matching the spelling exactly in my other query. So I'm just going to retitle this column to be ep number. Okay. And I'm going to come back down here, and when it's a little simpler, I can do this. Season ep number. Should do it. Yeah. Okay. So when my columns have the same name, I can tell it using. So before I had on, that's how we can match up if the column names are different. Make it simpler to just make sure your column names are spelled the same. So in your summary here that we did with the lines by data, make sure this is called whatever, something. I called it ep number to match what I called it in this column where I have as ep number. Right, so I've just made the column name exactly the same. Season was already exactly the same, so that was already there for me. All right, so I'm just telling it, here's my select statement, here's my join, here's my other select statement. So grab all the data from the first table, grab all the data from the second table, and join them together based on these two columns, okay? So now that we've run that, what you'll see in our results is over on the right-hand side, if I can scroll. Okay, so we have our ratings data, our vote count, our description, everything from our original rating. And we also have the number of lines of dialogue added in. All right, we have this column, which we added in from our other data set using our join. Yeah, question?
Sorry, I have a little error here. It
All right.
sounds like,
What's your error?
column episode number does not exist on the website.
Left side of join. Okay, so left side of join is going to be that first table that you said. It's going to kind of think left to right. So let's go up to that table. Looks like you just spelled out episode number.
Oh, I thought.
Here, yeah.
Probably wrong one.
Yeah. So it's yeah, it's gonna be a little easier if you name them the same. Yeah. What you got?
Also, I think it's the same thing.
You're gonna want using here instead of on. Yeah, sorry, I should have started with using. There you go. You got it. Anyone else getting an error? Okay, I'll come over here in a second. All right, what you got? Okay, looks like you got an extra comma in here before that. Yeah, so it's giving you a little hint here. It's saying syntax error near the as. Yeah, so just make sure you get rid of that comma. Yeah, it should just be a space. Perfect. Should do it. Okay, what you got over here? Okay, right side of join is going to be your second table. So it's gonna be your lines per episode. So let's go. Looks like this one is just called ep-no. So we got to give that an as. So that's what the column is called there, but you've got to give it an as. So just after your quote there, after the, or just before the comma. Yeah, between your quote. Yeah. Should be as there, and then give it that same name as your other table. Yeah. Yeah, question up front? Here, I'll come down this way. All right, what you got? Join, okay, so let's go back. You changed it already?
I changed it over. Yeah, I think I should try here.
So you have S number and then your other one has episode. F number and then go up to your
Here.
other one is episode number.
Oh, I think
Yeah.
I should try this one.
Yeah, give that a try.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, and it's saying at or near the open parentheses. So let's kind of look at that part of our query. Looks like we have season, comma, episode number, no comma, and then our next column. So I think you should have a comma in both of those. So there should be a comma between all your columns. So it looks like you're just missing one right there. Yep. There you go. Yeah. Question. All right, syntax error at or near count. Okay. Yep, we've already fixed it. Any other questions, errors? Go back here. Yes, question.
So never.
Mhm.
Just do you have some?
What are your seasons? Yeah. Just like a regular open. Yeah. Let's do that. Perfect. Yeah, there you go. You got it. Fix it yourself. Fantastic. Okay, yeah. Which part's not working? Oh, this one. This one up here is what you're getting. Yeah, okay, so this one's not working because it ran into an error on this one before. So lines per episode is trying to refer to. Looks like line per episode is getting your error. So let's go up to here. Syntax error near count. All right, got season, episode number. Looks like you're missing a comma for episode number. So every column needs to have a comma. Right? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Just this guy right here. Yeah, there you go. All right, and if you just rerun this one with the little play button, it should fix both that one and the one below it. So if you now go down to the one below, it should have rerun. All right, now it's giving you a different error. All right, yeah, it looks like yours might have a different name. So just go double check that name of your other data set is spelled the same. Okay, that should fix it. Okay, question, yeah.
What I do this one, so basically, I want out this one, but I'm comparing like those supermarkets in the season. So, like what kind of columns are like?
So this is because we're doing select star, it's just adding all the columns together. So it's just going to show you all the columns from both. You could say, maybe I just want the title, the rating, and the lines of dialogue. You could specify that instead of the star. You could tell it specific title names, but we're just grabbing them all with the
So
star.
we use those so it doesn't overlap. So-
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes, yep,
Thank you so
exactly.
much.
Yeah, good question. Okay, other questions, error messages, how we doing? Everybody get our stuff joined together. Okay, feeling good. All right. So to your question earlier about why do we need to add our episode number? The reason is so that we can do this, because if we didn't have episode number, we could have said just join on season. But we have 4 or 5 different rows here that are season 1, and our other data set also would have had 4 or 5 different rows that were season 1. So it wouldn't have known like which of those, like which row to go with which one, which piece of information is about which episode, unless we explicitly give it a column that says what episode number it is. So it would have mixed up, this first episode, which is July 5th, is one that has 557 lines of dialogue. It would have just picked one of these first 4 essentially at random if we just had that season 1. So we got to also tell it the episode number so it can match exactly line by line. I don't know if that helps. All right. Any other questions about joining? Okay, this is a lot of SQL to cover in our first sort of session. We're going to do one more little function that's another little fun kind of way you can summarize data, and then we'll kind of talk about it all together. Okay, so the very last thing that we're going to do for today is this. So we have our number. We've already summarized our transcript data. We've got season number, we've got episode number, we have number of lines of dialogue. but we're gonna add one more little thing, which is just gonna tell us the number of lines of dialogue for a specific character. Okay, we're gonna use a function called case to start with that. That's this last one in our little more complex functions. Okay, so the way you can think about case is sort of a different version of where. So we talked about where, which is going to filter down your whole data set. You have 172 rows and you say where season equals 8, you're going to filter it down to 22 rows. Okay, so where is going to filter down your entire data set. Case isn't going to filter your whole data set, but it's just going to, in this case, count. We're just going to count. It's just going to count some things with a certain case. So you could imagine I might have a full list of students and I want to count everybody who attended last week. All right, so I want to count case when attendance last week equals yes. And I just want to count those people. I don't want to, if somebody missed last week, I don't want to filter them out of my list. So I don't want to do that in where, because I don't want the student to drop fully off my list. I just want to know, did they attend last week or not? Okay, so that's the difference between case and where. So you're also looking at a certain condition, but you're not going to drop the other data fully out of your set. All right, so case is going to use another sort of like weird sentence type of logic. You're going to do count, or you could do another function. We're going to use count today. And then inside your count, you're going to use case when some condition, then the column you're going to count, and then end. Okay, so it's like a weird, it's like a kind of like a telegram language where you say stop at the end, right? You're going to say the word end at the very end. And that's going to tell it that it's going to only count, instead of counting star, which is what we were doing before, count everything. It's going to say just count when the specific condition applies. Okay, so the way that we're going to do that is you could add it on to your other data set with the ones where we did lines of dialogue, where we did count dialogue, or we could have done count star, same thing. You can either add it on here or you can create a new query. I'm going to do a new query just to keep it clean. All right, so I'm going to do select star from what I named my previous data set, which was lines per episode, lines per episode. All right, make sure that runs spelled correctly. Okay. That's the same thing I had before. Do I want to do it this way? Maybe it's easier to, I don't know. I'm going to do it in the same one. Maybe you're going to show it all on one screen at the same time. Okay, so I'm essentially just adding a column. I'm going to do it here, and I'm going to just add a comma. So anytime you're adding a column, I think a few of you had this error. If you're adding a column, you got to make sure that there's commas between all of your columns. Okay, so I'm going to add a column, and I'm going to use my my case statement that we just talked about. All right, so I'm going to do count. And this is where I'm going to introduce my case. And I'm going to type out all my words first and then go back in and add my conditions. So I'm going to do case when. I need to put something in there. Then I need to put something in there. End. Okay, this is sort of my bare bones. And then I'm going to do as column name. So I'm going to say Elaine lines. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to say, in addition to a column for the lines of all the dialogue, I want to know in every episode, how many lines does Elaine have? Okay. So when is going to be my condition. So in this case, I want my character to equal Elaine. Now, ideally, I would go back up and double check in my original data set where I did my select star from, which is up here. I would go check exactly how Elaine is spelled. All right, so in this case, I'm just back up to my original thing that we looked at. Elaine is in all caps. So I'm going to make sure that I grab Elaine in all caps. All right, come back down to what I'm writing. Yeah. Okay, so where character equals Elaine, I'm doing it in all caps just because that's how the data was. That's in single quotes because it's a bit of text. So I'm telling it that it's text. Then what do I want it to count? I want it to count my dialogue column. So essentially count the number of times that there is dialogue in the column when the character equals Elaine. Okay, so to my other point about filtering, I don't have a where character equals Elaine because I still want to know all the lines of dialogue, even the ones that aren't Elaine. And I also just want this number that's doing a little filtering. Makes sense? I'm not filtering my whole data. I'm just using this to filter out this one piece. I will run this. All right, and you see what popped up down here. So we have our same 3 columns that we had before, but now we have an additional line, which is this one right here. An additional column, Elaine lines, and that has, so of the 557 lines of dialogue in the first episode, 53 are by Elaine. Right, so I can see that for each episode. How many lines of dialogue she has. Any thoughts? Yeah.
I have a small question, is that what is the difference between the single code and the double coding?
Yeah, good question. So anytime you're doing a where in general, you want it to be single quotes because you're telling it that it's text. Before we were doing like where season equals 8, it's gonna like assume it's a number unless you give it the single quotes and tell it it's text. So like when we did season equals 8, we didn't have quotes around it because it's a number. So here you want single quotes for this. The double quotes are only appearing, the double quotes are going to be to refer to columns that have capital letters or spaces or things that are weird. Typically your columns are just going to be all lowercase and no spaces. And in that case, we can just refer to them like this. Some of these column names in this data set are a little weird. So the like autocomplete thing is doing that, double quotes. Yeah. If you're doing your own column names, I would just keep them all lowercase, keep it super simple. Don't worry about the double quotes. All right. So you should be able to add this for any other character. So you should be able to add this for Jerry or George or Kramer or whoever else. You could just do a comma here and do the whole same line again, but for Jerry lines or George lines. So give that a try. You should just be able to do comma right here. And then the same line one more time, but with a different character name, just so you can get a sense for it. Okay. So I might do something like this, count. I'm just going to copy my line from above. Case when character equals, let's try Kramer, right? Then dialogue, same thing. Extra quote, do my end, and then as, I'll call this Kramer lines. All right, I made sure when I was adding a new column, I'm adding my comma afterwards. All right, then I will run this and you'll see my new column pops up right here. So Kramer has 7 lines in the first episode and then 18, etc. Okay, so I could do that for any character that I want. All right, any questions about case? Errors. All right. Cool. All right. We covered a lot of stuff today. That was a lot to pack in, especially if you've truly never looked at SQL before. So I think your main takeaway from today should be the general structure of a query, right? Is select something from something else. There's a bunch of little ways we can modify it. We can filter out information. We can add more columns. We can apply some functions. We can join together with other data, which we'll talk a lot more about next week. We just kind of scratched the surface of that today. So there's a lot that we can do with this information. Now, obviously, we're looking at some data about a TV show, right? It's not something that's necessarily relevant to everyone, but you could imagine, right? Let's say you worked for a streaming service or a TV network. You'd have some sort of data set like this somewhere that has all kinds of data about your episodes. You could imagine data about the cast members, the actors who are in it. You might have things like budget, how much money was spent on each episode, and then what were the ratings for that episode. You might want to do a chart of does higher spending on an episode correlate to higher ratings on that episode, right? So you can start to see how combining data sources is super powerful, super interesting, and applies to all sorts of things. So just to kind of talk about where we're going to go next with this series. So this is a total of 5 weeks, although I think we're skipping a couple because of holidays and stuff. So the last one is in December. But week 2, which is in 2 weeks from today, we will be doing sort of a SQL. If this was SQL 101, we'll sort of be doing a SQL 201. So we'll kind of refresh through some of the stuff we did today. We'll talk about a bunch more functions, a bunch more cool stuff that you can do with SQL. After that, so week 3, we'll sort of like start fresh. We won't talk about SQL really at all. We will dive into Python, very basic. If you haven't seen Python before, it'll be super accessible. We'll do a second week with Python just to get you feeling a little more comfortable. And then in week 5, we'll bring everything together. As you can tell in Hex, if you've been kind of clicking around, the screen's doing something really fun right now. When you add a cell, let's see if it'll let me do that. You can add a SQL cell or you can add a Python cell in between. So we can essentially do some SQL, maybe get our data joined together how we want it, and then we can run some Python to do some additional analysis there. We can also use some visualization features in here. Oh my gosh, I don't know what's happening to my screen. We can also add some visualization features in here and kind of do that all together. So in that, our last week of this sort of 5-week series. Wow, this is truly terrifying. Okay, I'm gonna give up on the screen share. In the last week of our 5-week series, we are gonna be putting all that stuff together. So yeah, that's kind of all I got. I have a couple of recommended resources for kind of refreshing yourself on SQL, getting to know it a little bit more. If I can get the screen fixed, I'll put those links up in a second. And then these slides and this recording will also be on the annenbergdl.org website if you want a little refresher. I will also hang out for a couple more minutes if you have any questions or anything you didn't get answered during class. But thank you all so much for coming, and I hope to see you all next week. Thank you. Just a little. Yeah, okay, so something's happening in your account. So what I would do if I were you, and I would put my cursor on count and I would go forwards and backwards and just look for anything weird. All right, so I go forward a little bit. Okay, I've got my open parenthesis here, case when this is looking okay. I think I might be missing an equal sign between character and Kramer. So let's try that. I missed those all 3. So let's add those in. And see if that does it. That didn't quite fix it. Okay, so then I would start from count and go backwards. Okay, so we did forwards, fix something, went backwards. All right, that one looks okay. I see a comma. This one, I go backward. Oh, there's no comma. No comma. Okay, no comma there. Maybe no comma on the next one as well. And see if that could be it. Your last one should need a comma just here. Or just like your last column.
My last one.
Yeah, that one should be good without, and then let's give that a run.
Oh,
Very good. So yeah, anytime you get an error that's like something is near, I would just do your